Coming up today on Locked On at Texas Tech, a midseason progress report from Joey McGuire and ourselves, and we also consider where the Red Raiders fit into the Big 12 family portrait. Next on Locked On Texas Tech.
You are Locked On Texas Tech, your daily podcast on the Texas Tech Red Raiders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
We're going to start this thing off right. Raider! Everything runs through Lubbock.
Great to be with you again on Locked On at Texas Tech on the Locked On Podcast Network. And thanks for making us your first listen on YouTube or anywhere you get podcasts. Today's episode brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, use the code Locked On College for $20 off your first purchase with the only Chris level. I'm Casey Cowan. Chris, great to see you once again, my friend. And as we now have had a little time to digest the win over Baylor, which took you to 3-3, got you back to 500 on the season, and that 3-3 would signify that you have reached the midway point of your regular season. We're going to take a listen to Red Raider head coach Joey McGuire, essentially making a midway point assessment of his team. We'll get into some of what you and I see out there as far as the Red Raiders go, and then, of course, what we're seeing more broadly across the conference where Texas Tech could fit in. Most recently, pretty shiny as you roll out 2 wins home and away against Houston and Baylor. But we'll get down to some of the details. Before we get to that, let's take a listen and hear the perspective of Red Raider head coach Joey McGuire.
The things that I'm happy with, we're running the football. The way we're running the football is helping us settle the game down. It's helping us control some different situations. Once again, because of that, we had some big plays in the passing game, so I'm happy with that. I think we definitely have to grow, and play off the run. We need more big plays in the passing game off the run, not just straight drop back, but, our play action. We got to get some guys going, at receiver that we definitely can and will. We let Shapen out of the pocket a couple times. That was pass rush lanes. Y'all kind of been a broken record with that a little bit. We've got to keep getting better at that. Usually whenever you have things happen like those sacks, it gets guys really going and things happen in bunches. And so we affected the quarterback in the second half against Houston. We affected the quarterback the entire game against Baylor, and so we need to continue that. I think those are the things we're doing well that we've got to continue. I think we've got to do a better job of defending the big play in the passing game. And then we got to ride the wave on special teams. Kenny Perry's groups affecting every single game. Once again, affected the game with a big punt return. And we got to ride that wave. We have a lot of confidence right now on special teams. We've got really good returners. And, our punter has been elite. I think he's the best in the country. He'll play a long time on Sundays, so we've got to continue that.
Chris, it is still an incomplete picture, but midway point, and boy, it's been a roller coaster with some ups and some downs so far. What do you hear from Coach McGuire, and how are you seeing it?
Well, yeah, you're at the halfway point. You're 500. You are 2-1 in the league, and if you. I think we all thought you'd be, a bit better than that record-wise. I think the team is a bit different than you thought, that we thought. Fair. I didn't expect to be running it for a 180 a game and throwing it only for 220. I thought those numbers were, it's kind of it's just different than what we're used to around here. But you're still, what's funny is you're still averaging, I think last year you averaged 34 points a game. I think right now, to this point, I think you're averaging 35 a game. So that's about right. And I thought, because I think what I hear Joey saying, and it's kind of what we touched on with yesterday's show or the day after the game, but after the Baylor game, we've had these conversations about how well your big boys played. And I think that there's a direct correlation into them not playing as well or like you thought they would at the start of the season, and then them playing much better now, and hence the reason you've won 3 out of your last 4. and why you're running the football more, and why he says we're really, we've affected the last two quarterbacks. Can it continue? It needs to continue is what I would suggest, but can it? We shall see. Because I'm under no illusions in that I think you've beaten two of the worst teams in the league. Okay? I don't want to try to oversell a win over Houston or Baylor. I think they are right now two of the worst teams in the league. You've hammered them. You've done what you're supposed to. I don't know if we know enough yet to suggest that West Virginia is one of the best teams in the league. They are right now, and I think that the same can be said about Houston and Baylor, with the opposite being true. But I think you're about to start playing a little bit more of the meat of the league the next couple of weeks, especially, and even the week after. I think, the two purple teams in BYU are going to be tougher tests than potentially Baylor and Houston were. We'll see how you handle it. But I think you've kind of changed, Cowan, who you thought you would be to start the season. Because, I mean, you remember how much we talked about that O-line is the most improved position on the team. I think it's going to be a lot better, and it just wasn't to start out. But I think they deserve a lot of credit for how much better that they've gotten, and they're dealing with an injury situation right now as well, with Cole Spencer being out right now, and then even Ty Buchanan, one of your top backups, being out. So I think it's just been kind of different how we think we know, or we'd like to think we know what this team's gonna look like, and then you play it out, and it's a bit different. That's the beauty of sports.
I really feel like, yes, you're centering a lot of this recent surge around some improved trench play, specifically on the offensive line, because I think if we ask the next question about what do you actually feel like after 6 games is the most reliable aspect of your team, I think I would answer defensive front. And I think I felt that way game 1. I think I feel that way game 7. I don't know if that's changed all that much, but it really is some progression offensively, and maybe even more commitment as well to what they've done well all along offensively as a line, and that is move forward and block for Taj Brooks, and hopefully continuing to find other ball carriers as well to make some way for. But Chris, I really feel like, obviously we know where games are won and lost. That's at the line of scrimmage. But up front defensively, I think for the most part, even though you most recently came into a sack surge and really piling up some things statistically, I think for the most part you've held your own. I think Jalen Hutchings, Tony Bradford, specifically Hutchings, I think is probably one of your 3 most impactful players so far to this point in the year, individually speaking. But if you have an offensive line surge to kind of join them in that, then yeah, why could you not have a much more successful second half? You agree or disagree if I asked you, what do you feel like is the most reliable moving into the second half? You thinking defensive front? You thinking elsewhere? Where do you go? First, today's episode brought to you by PrizePicks, the most exciting way to test your skills and play daily fantasy sports, and a great way to add juice to any game, anytime. And if you've got the game, you can turn $10 into $250 with just a few taps. Easy gameplay, quick withdrawals, and a giant selection of players, projections, and stat categories are just part of what makes PrizePicks the #1 daily fantasy sports app. So go to prizepicks.com/lockedoncollege. That's prizepicks.com/lockedoncollege and use our code LOCKEDONCollege for a first deposit match up to $100. Again, right now, PrizePicks is going to match your first deposit up to $100 with the promo code LOCKEDONCollege at prizepicks.com/lockedoncollege. Daily fantasy sports made easy. Today's episode brought to you by Gametime, and buying tickets to an event, especially last minute, can feel like a feeding frenzy, but you can escape the frenzy with Gametime. It's the fastest and easiest way to buy tickets for sports, concerts, and more, and not just fast, secure, and easy to use, but you're also going to find unbeatable deals on last minute tickets, and with their best price guarantee, you can stop stressing and start pre-gaming. Download the Gametime app today and rest easy with the Gametime guarantee, knowing you're always going to get the best price, and you can have them in a flash delivered straight to your phone. Snag tickets without the stress with Gametime by downloading the Gametime app, creating an account, and then just use the code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. The code is Locked On College for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and use the promo code Locked On College for $20 off by downloading the Gametime app today for last-minute tickets at the lowest price, guaranteed. What do you feel like is the most reliable moving into the second half? You thinking defensive front? You thinking elsewhere? Where do you go?
Yeah, and I guess it depends on what we I don't know. How do we define reliable? I agree with you in that I think the one thing that I felt like your defensive line didn't do very well that they're doing now is making these plays that affect the game. Were they solid to start out? Sure. But how many sacks and fumbles and pressure situations did you cause against Oregon or Wyoming or even West Virginia that could have altered the game? And I guess they picked off a few against Nico Marchiol there up in Morgantown, but I think you get what I'm saying. It just wasn't enough versus Oregon to alter it. But yeah, and I think in a way you're maybe better off now than you were before because you've seen some things from Chuck. Old Charles Esters. You've seen some things from now Duda, who's now back after missing some time. I think Dylan Spencer has now entered the chat, and he's going to be a mainstay, whereas before he was not really a part of the rotation. Yeah, I mean, I think it's a solid group. Heck, man, you could make what's funny is you could make the argument that the most reliable player on your entire football team right now, outside of Taj Brooks, because he's pretty reliable, 4 100-yard games in a row will enter you into that conversation. Ben Roberts. I mean, tell me I'm wrong. Tell me I'm wrong as far as like if you just single out one player, because he's just been solid. I mean, and this was a bit of a scary, question mark, I think, for you, just because of how good the guys were there last year with Kosai Eldridge and Krishan Merriweather. And then when Jacob Rodriguez goes down, you're like, uh-oh, this may not go well. And all Ben Roberts has done is said, I got it, man. We're good. Jacob, take as long as you need to get back. And he's your leading tackler. I mean, he's on pace. He's on pace for over 100 tackles on the season and or right at it. And he didn't really do a ton in those first couple of games. So anyway, I just think it's I don't know. I think it's a bit. Well, I guess he did. He started the Oregon game was the second game. That's the one where he kind of but he didn't play a ton in the Wyoming game, I should say. So anyway, I think that's what's been fascinating is kind of watch that emerge because now, as far as concerns or question marks, one of the least questions marks or concerns that I have on the entire football team, which says a lot about Ben Roberts.
Yeah, I want to get to coming up on, I think we'll do it on tomorrow's show, a conversation about what the defensive identity actually is, because you want to talk about some roller coaster, especially recently. We've seen some wild swings from one of the worst halves we've seen this season to an incredible half and then a statistically prolific game in Waco the following week. So where are we at? And that will also include some thoughts from Joey McGuire in a conversation that should be fun to have, Chris, regarding that group of linebackers. Dare to dream what it could look like when you get back Jacob Rodriguez. I noticed Coach McGuire did leave the door open for this week, although he did really emphasize BYU week. The door was not completely slammed shut, so I'll allow it to be open, at least here on Locked On Texas Tech, until it is slammed shut, but we're close. And we'll get to some thoughts on what could be a bit of a shuffle as it relates to Rodriguez, Pierre, and Ben Roberts, what I hope is going to continue to be a luxury. That was a bit of a surprise answer. I thought you might try to pull a fast one on me, Chris, and go somewhere that I was going to say is allowed, special teams. Because as Coach McGuire mentions there, and I know it would be the most popular answer to talk about like Austin McNamara individually, and it's some recency bias, I would have to say, as far as the impact that they've made. But, hey, what have you done for me lately? Special teams has done a lot for you lately.
Yeah, and it's a phase that in a lot of, in some of these close games, and I think you're going to play in several here down the stretch because I just don't know if you can expect to win, some of these games by 20 plus like you've done in the last couple of weeks. I think this is a phase, and again, we'll talk about it as the week goes along here with Kansas State. But I mean, where are they always better than you at? Better than almost everybody that they play, but I think you can say that over the last month, I think you've been better than the opposition at special teams. Maybe you haven't handily won that matchup, but I think you could certainly argue it. But I think that you're affecting the game positively. And I think too, I don't want to leave him out, but Gino Garcia seems to settle in. You don't look at it and, he just kind of, he hasn't had too many pressure kicks per se, although I think there's a few mixed in there, but he's just kind of done his job and he's under the radar, which is what's great about a kicker most of the time. But we'll see what happens on some of these closer games. But I think, your return game, your ability to block a punt against Houston certainly affects things. I think, you've popped a return in a lot of these games, which even if it's a 20-plus yarder instead of a scoring, it does flip the field and it gives you momentum for sure.
Hidden yardage is, well, they call it that for a reason, but Texas Tech has piled some of that up, whether from a scoring perspective or just some of that yardage and flipping the field from a special team standpoint here in some recent weeks, and would love to see that happen. And yes, that is a terrific tease for shows coming up this week. You think we'll mention special teams again as K-State is coming to town? We will dive back into that. But as it stands here today, Chris, let's wrap up our conversation with a broader look at the Big 12 Conference and where Texas Tech sits, because obviously the blows that you took record-wise, save for the one in Morgantown, came out of conference. So you probably feel, I think from a season perspective, at least I do as a fan, maybe a little more beat up than you actually are. And I'm just talking about your record, win and loss, because in the league, you've gotten off to a decent start. You do have a road win included in that, and you never want to waste a home opportunity. So a lot on the line this week against the Wildcats. But I'm wondering how you see the landscape with a little bit of evidence turned in now. Contenders, pretenders, beyond that. I know where we were hoping Texas Tech was going to be coming into the year, have regained a little bit of their footing, but where do you think they've fit in? And this is now on the heels of one of the top two in the league taking a loss over the weekend. First, today's episode brought to you by Jase Medical. And in this day and age, everyone should be empowered to care for themselves and their loved ones when hit with the unexpected. And that's why Jase Medical is offering the Jase Case. The Jase Case includes 5 life-saving antibiotics for emergency use and gives you peace of mind, so you're not just hoping for access to medication during an emergency. With Jase Medical and the Jase Case, what you need is already in hand. And they make it simple, handling everything from online evaluation to licensed pharmacy medication delivery, along with ongoing consultation and care. And with shortages, pandemics, reliance on China, and general supply chain issues, you need to be prepared now more than ever. So to do just that, head to jasemedical.com, where the process is simple. Just fill out a form and bam, prescription life-saving medications are headed to your door. And right now, save more than $360 by getting these life-saving antibiotics with Jase Medical, plus an additional $20 off by using our code LOCKEDON at checkout. Again, that's jasemedical.com, JASE medical.com, and the code is locked on for an added $20 off at checkout. And don't be caught unprepared with the Jase Case from Jase Medical. But where do you think they've fit in? And this is now on the heels of one of the top two in the league taking a loss over the weekend.
And I think a lot of these conversations are starting to happen as, the playoff conversation happens each week. And then you start to figure out, okay, who's a legit contender in each one of these leagues, who could potentially play for the a league championship. And now that you've got, most every school, I think, has played 2 or 3 conference games. And with obviously with several more to go for everybody. But yeah, you can start to look and see who's legitimately involved, or who's already on the outs. And I think from a Big 12 standpoint, you have a situation where you have 2 teams that have not taken a conference loss yet. They will play, I believe, at some point in the next 2 to 4 weeks. I'm not exactly sure when it is. But so one of them is guaranteed to get a loss in that game. We're talking about Oklahoma and West Virginia. And then, I think most people, though, are already pointing toward, hey, man, Oklahoma and Texas are going to get and play again in Arlington. That's going to decide it. We can't wait to see that matchup again. Save it. I will be rooting for everything but that matchup again. I don't care, yeah. And if only one of them is involved, I don't care who the other team is, even if it's TCU or somebody that I really am not a fan of, I will root for the team in the league that's staying.
In the league, yeah.
Yeah, that's in the league. Yeah, sorry, not sorry. But I is West Virginia a legitimate contender? Well, I mean, right now they are, and they've got a pretty manageable schedule. I think it's not – if they caught some breaks with some of these injuries that they suffered against TCU – and they continue to play the way that they've been playing and can kind of stay healthy, it's not out of the question that they're going to win, 7 or 8 games. And they're already sitting here at 4-1 because they don't play Texas. And I don't think they play either one of the Kansas schools, which if you're looking at that, correct. I think that's right. I think that you catch a break there. If they play all the newcomers in the Big 12, I think they do have a game against Oklahoma, which obviously will be tough. But there's not a lot left on their schedule that you go, oh goodness, they are going to have a hard time. I mean, it's not really there. I think, heck, if you were looking at it on paper, you would have said that 2-game stretch between Texas Tech and TCU would have been a bit difficult, and they maneuvered their way through both of them.
And got up to a week off,
Absolutely.
Recharge the tank.
And they'll play this Thursday night versus Houston. But Kansas is an interesting one. I think they're going to be a handful. They're going to be a pain to deal with. And that's a sneaky tough game for Texas Tech. The one thing that concerns me for them, though, is the injury to Jalen Daniels. I don't know if they can continue this stretch if he's not involved in it. We'll see. It's a back injury. He's a quarterback. That's a bit tricky. Then you have these 2 teams that are playing this weekend in Lubbock, Texas. You have the defending champ Kansas State Wildcats that I think, are struggling. And then you have the Red Raiders. And I don't know if we can sit here and legitimately say the Red Raiders are a contender yet. What is interesting, though, is that you start looking at some of these teams, you don't just have a lot of margin for error. You can't just take a loss or 2 and then hope to stay in this race. I don't know how many more games Texas is going to lose. Oklahoma doesn't really have that tough of a stretch on paper either throughout. And so your margin for error is pretty small here. If you're Texas Tech, it would be very wise if you want to realistically be in this race. You better string them together. You could maybe afford 1 more loss. If you take 2 more, I think you're just out. I think you need too much help. The tiebreaker stuff doesn't work. I mean, with whatever. And that's assuming that the Oklahoma and Texas of the conference have taken a loss or 2 along the way, which you're hoping there. So I just I don't know. It just goes to show you that when you get in this conference race discussion, you got to win most of them, man. And you've already lost 1. And, and you're sitting here looking at it, Cowan, and there were years when you'd be like, man, if you could just go 1-1 over these next 2 games, man, you'd take it, which that's going to be quite a feat. You go either beat Kansas State, the defending champs, a team you have not beaten hardly ever, or going up to BYU, which is in this thing, and they've had a much better record than before, and everybody says it's a nightmare to play against. Guess what? You're going to be there at night.
Under the lights.
And honestly, you need to win both of them if you want to remain in this thing. And that's not going to be easy. You can do it. Make no mistake. You're going to have to just get better and get a little lucky and play well and all those things. But I just trying to lay out the picture, man, this is going to be tough.
I can't say I feel like Texas Tech fits in that picture. I don't think anything has changed dramatically enough for me to feel like, okay, all of a sudden we're thinking about a contender category.
Right.
I didn't come into the season viewing them in that category, so that's no devastating, reality to me. But I'm still sitting here thinking, first and foremost, are you back to a bowl game, Chris? And just the next 2 weeks as a great example. I mean, the remainder of the season is filled with, okay, good chance, bad chance, good chance, bad chance, good chance, bad chance. Do I like it or do I not? Save for a really tough historical trip to Austin or something like that. You can make yourself a believer as to why you feel like you could be successful and get back at least to a 6th win or beyond. Or you can understand that, hey, regardless of what faults, say, BYU may have, under the lights on Saturday night against the Cougars is not going to be some tiptoe through the tulips. I mean, we all know that's going to be life for Texas Tech. So I would still place them in that next category, really just trying to get back to a bowl game and continue to maintain some progress as a program in year number 2 under Joey McGuire, which I feel like would be the case. You and I talked about this offseason. You could be as good or slightly improved as a team, maybe wind up with the same or slightly worse record. And I still feel like that reality is kind of in play here.
Yeah, and I think the way I phrased it, we loved all the predictions of Texas Tech and Big 12, being in the Big 12 and maybe an outside shot at the college football playoff. And, we love Brett McMurphy saying, hey, you're in the Cotton Bowl against LSU, or you're in the Cotton Bowl versus Bama and all that. So we talked about it. But I think anytime I've been asked, and was asked in August, my standard line was, I think this team will be very relevant in the conference race into November, which is, and I think you're teetering on whether that's going to be true or not.
Yes, you could.
You could
not.
Yeah,
Right
and I think you're teetering on that. But yeah, you're right. I mean, again, the dynamics change. The starting quarterback's out. We've the middle linebackers out. There's a few other injuries that you've dealt with and things like that, which the variables change. And I think there's teams in the league that, Kansas is a bit better than we thought. Maybe Kansas State, maybe TCU are not as good as you thought. I don't know. I don't know if we know enough. Baylor's not as good as you thought. There was a time when we thought Oklahoma State was like buried and whatever. Well, guess what? It's like the Undertaker. He just sat up in the coffin, he
heard the gong.
Yeah, that's right. Here we go. I'm back in typical Mike Gundy fashion. Yeah. So it's still a bit early, but I think we're, you are either in that second tier or third tier of contenders, if you will. I don't know if I put you with like a West Virginia or a Kansas just yet, because I think Oklahoma and Texas, and then there's a gap. Yep. But I think you're right there, close to that or right there behind it. But again, this will get sorted out here rather quickly. Because if you win the next two and go into that bye week at what would that be, 4-1 in the league, you were absolutely a contender for this conference championship. A lot can change with a couple of wins in the next 2 weeks, especially because of who they're against.
Yes. And likely relevant hitting November, as you were talking about just a moment ago. And yeah, I think you put some wind back in your sails because of what you've done in the last couple of weeks, just as a team in general. And also when it comes to some second half optimism, there's probably a little more wind in a fan's sail because of what we've seen Wyoming and West Virginia subsequently do as teams, which is none too shabby, including Wyoming getting a top 25 win over the weekend, for whatever that is worth. And I would say, Chris, each of these upcoming games could really check a particular box for this team as far as traits or intangibles. You beat K-State. You've beat a well-coached fundamental team coming off of a loss. No easy feat.
That had your number.
That's right. You go on the road, you beat BYU. You've gone on the road, hostile environment, and somehow figured out a way to get a win. That'll be a different experience than Waco, Texas, environment-wise. No doubt in my mind. You come back under a brighter light and handle some success against an emotional foe in Texas Christian. You're battling for leather. It's the battle for the saddle, the West Texas Championship. You're really checking some boxes there to put together something interesting for the month of November as far as feeling like you could be in that category. We're getting out ahead of our skis right now, but it starts this week with K-State, and kind of excited because of some recent momentum as to what that could look like. We will turn an eye toward K-State coming up on tomorrow's show, some thoughts from Joey McGuire, and also get back to what exactly we feel like this defensive identity is going to be. What you're facing across the line of scrimmage this week is a much different challenge than what you had last week, really on both sides, but with some varying results defensively for Tim DeRuyter. Curious as to what we feel like that Red Raider defense actually is at this point in the season. We'll get to that and more coming up tomorrow. Chris, we'll do it again, man. Looking forward to it, and thanks for the time today as always.
Absolutely, man. We'll talk to you tomorrow. Keep hope alive, everybody. And meaningful football is on the way. That's good. That's always fun.
That's always good. Yeah, let's extend it right on in to November and beyond. Subscribe on YouTube so you never miss an episode or wherever you get podcasts. And we'll see you right back here for the next round on Locked On Texas Tech.